Okay, that was U.S. President Joe Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Washington. Zelenskyy has made this trip to the capital to meet with lawmakers and plead his case for more U.S. aid to Ukraine. To break down what we just heard, I'm joined now by the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. So, Katie, some stark language there, including from the president saying they're rapidly coming to the end of our ability to help Ukraine if Congress doesn't act. What's your takeaway from what's happened there today?
Well, at this point, David, it doesn't look like Volodymyr Zelenskyy is going to get what he was hoping to while here in Washington. He held a series of closed-door meetings up on Capitol Hill. That, of course, is where the debate is underway as to whether the United States Congress should pass another $50 billion in spending that would support Ukraine in its war effort. It has been bogged down in the Senate, and there's a debate. A number of Republican lawmakers say, hey, if we're going to approve this spending, we want to actually see the Democrats in the White House take some action on the southern U.S. border. They want to see changes to immigration laws to make it tougher when people try to cross into the United States illegally, and they want to see billions of dollars more invested in southern border infrastructure to help the resources on help law enforcement on the ground there and help with immigration officials there. And they have sort of tied these two things together. The White House has accused these Republicans of holding aid for Ukraine hostage, saying don't give Vladimir Putin the Christmas gift that he wants, which is to run out of funding from the United States. The White House had really been pushing lawmakers to pass this before the end of the year because they fear that Ukraine is going to run out of funding, and then that is going to be a very dire situation for the Ukrainian military on the battlefield. What stood out to me in that news conference, one, we don't have any sort of major announcement. Joe Biden, in terms of that, getting that funding across the line, getting a deal with lawmakers to get that passed in that within that time frame. That does not appear to be the case. There have been some last-minute meetings going on Capitol Hill. I never want to say one thing one way or the other about what Congress might do, but at this stage, it doesn't look like it's going to happen. Another moment from this news conference that really stood out to me is one of the reporters asked, they said, look, it doesn't look like Ukraine is in a position where they're going to be winning this war. At what stage does Volodymyr Zelenskyy sit down and think about, okay, we need to start to talk about ceding some territory to end the fighting? And he called that, he spoke in Ukrainian. He said that is absolutely insane, quite frankly. And he went on to list all the reasons why he believes that insane. He's not talking, he described Ukraine, he says it's not territory. We're talking about families, families that live here. And when people are being killed, raped, and tortured, how can you have those conversations? And that is the point he was trying to make. This is not the trip that Volodymyr Zelenskyy had hoped, at least not at this moment, and is very different from the other trips that he's made here to Washington. About a year ago this time, he was in D.C. and he was really celebrated as the heroic wartime leader of Ukraine, really trying to stave off those attacks from Russia, putting up a very, very strong fight with Republican lawmakers and Democratic lawmakers, really standing behind Ukraine, passing package after package after package. And we have seen $75 billion approved and sent to Ukraine from the United States. And we've seen another pledge today of another $200 million. That's not something that needs to be approved by Congress. That comes from a presidential drawdown fund. It's sort of a different bucket of funding. But the main thing that Canadians need to take away from this big news conference or from this trip at this stage, it does not appear as if Volodymyr Zelenskyy is going to be getting what he hoped for. It doesn't appear we're on sort of the brink of a deal for Republicans and Democrats to agree on U.S. border security in order to get the votes they need to get that passed through Congress. And that's where things sort of sit right now. Yeah, and the U.S. has really provided the spine of Ukrainian military defense, right? Like a lot of countries are giving a lot of things, but nothing on the scale or of the technological quality that the United States has delivered, certainly on air defense. And on your point, Katie, when President Zelenskyy was asked about ceding territory and saying that was insane, he talked about it's not just land, it's people's lives. And he said, let me ask you, would you surrender your children to terrorists? So clearly, the president there not willing to give up. The U.S. president offering a rebuke to the Republicans in Congress, saying that Russian propagandists are using their actions to celebrate what is going on the war. So the positions are clearly entrenched here on this. So where does this go from here, Katie? Like, is there any kind of a path forward here where Joe Biden can deliver an aid package to Ukraine that he wants? Well, it doesn't appear it's going to happen on the timeline that the White House would like. He wasn't giving up all hope at this point. We do know that senior officials from the Biden administration, including Alejandro Mayorkas, had been meeting with lawmakers up on Capitol Hill in the hopes of trying to reach some sort of agreement. Again, never say never when it comes to U.S. Congress, because honestly, even though everyone is entrenched in this moment, you never know what is going to give, or perhaps nothing gives. In this moment right now, there isn't that sort of agreement, but the conversations continue to take place. Joe Biden indicating again he's not going to give up hope. He's going to hope that there can be some compromise on these conversations, and that saying that, yes, we are willing to compromise on this. But a big part of the ask from Republicans is they want a number of policies that are really reminiscent of the Trump era, really harsh in terms of compared to what the Democrats would like to see happen. And so coming to some sort of agreement around that, American lawmakers have had disputes over how to handle immigration for decades, trying to sort of find that common pathway under this kind of pressure, very difficult.
Yeah, and Katie, I take your point on not predicting what the Congress will do. We learned that in our many conversations about the Speaker's race. Appreciate it, Katie. This is CBC's Katie Simpson live with us in Washington, D.C. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy made the trip to the U.S. Capitol today to meet with lawmakers and plead his case for more U.S. aid for Ukraine.
Putin is banking on the United States failing to deliver for Ukraine. We must prove him wrong.
It's very important that by the end of this year, we can send a very strong signal of our unity to the aggressor and the unity of Ukraine, America, Europe, the entire free world.
For more on this and some Canadian perspective, I want to bring in Alexandra Chyczyi. She is the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Alexandra, it's good to speak with you again.
Thank you.
It doesn't sound like President Zelenskyy got the answers he was looking for in the U.S. today, that Congress is still tying further aid for Ukraine to action on their border with Mexico. How concerned are you about the deadlock that seems to be gripping Washington over this right now?
Well, I think the entire world should be concerned about the fracturing of support for Ukraine that we're seeing. And of course, given the significance of the United States as the leader of the coalition in support for Ukraine, it is concerning. However, I think President Biden remained hopeful. He offered the opportunity to continue to negotiate with the faction of the Republican Party that remains opposed to delivering aid for Ukraine. And President Zelenskyy did come away with $200 million of air and ammunition support today. So it wasn't a complete disappointment, but I think it still has a way to go to have the full package approved.
Yeah, $200 million is a lot of money, but the need is in the billions, right? Which is the reality of fighting a military the size of Russia. And President Biden said today that we are rapidly coming to the end of our ability to help Ukraine without further congressional approval. What happens if the U.S. doesn't move past this impasse? I mean, can Ukraine, I know the determination is there, but would it have the capacity to defeat Russia without further American military aid?
I think Ukraine is hopeful that its European neighbors will continue to support them in their fight. These are neighbors who feel the threat far more strongly than perhaps some of the American people. Certainly the Baltic countries and Poland understand that they could be next in the march that Putin has started. And so they remain steadfast supporters. And certainly Germany and the UK have really stepped up to the plate in delivering support, as well as other countries. I don't mean to ignore them.
No, it's not an exhaustive list. There's quite a broad coalition there. But I know you said off the top that people should be concerned about sort of the fraying of the consensus or the erosion of support. I can't remember the precise words. You've also been critical of what's been happening here in Canada, particularly with the Conservative Party, that have voted against the Ukrainian Free Trade Agreement again today, and in their line-by-line filibuster last week, voted against Operation Unifier, which was an initiative launched under Stephen Harper's government to have the Canadian Armed Forces train the Ukrainian military. What is your big concern about what the Conservatives are doing, and why do you think they're doing it?
Well, we are concerned that this is the thin edge of the wedge in Canada, that while the Canadian public still supports Ukraine, but any fracturing in the political coalition is concerning. That's how it started in the United States. And what we don't want to see is the same thing happening in Canada. It's critical that Ukraine not be a partisan issue in Canada. And we remain hopeful that the Conservatives, the opposition, will develop and make known their policy on supporting Ukraine militarily, economically, and on the humanitarian front.
Their argument has been they oppose the free trade agreement because they've had two explanations. Canada is imposing a carbon tax on Ukraine, which Ukraine has actually had since 2011, or that it's unnecessary to insert the climate change language into the trade agreement, and that it's empty virtue signaling by the Liberals, in sort of their words. And in terms of the vote against Operation Unifier last week, they say it was part of a series of non-confidence motions and not necessarily a reflection of their vote, of their support for Ukraine. Do you accept those explanations that we've at least had publicly from the Conservatives?
Well, the vote on the budget, of course, it's silly season, and we know that Her Majesty's loyal opposition votes against every budget. That's just part of the political posturing. But what was concerning was that this vote came so close on the heels of the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement debate, and that it was, in fact, a vote against Operation Unifier, which was a policy instituted by their former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper.
Right. So this all came up in question period today, and the Liberals, to no surprise, are using this as a wedge against the Conservatives, against Mr. Poilievre. And he gave an answer today, gave a response to this today in question period that the Liberals also jumped on. So I just want to play this clip and get your reaction to it. Just listen to this.
We understand with this miserable record, he doesn't want to talk about Canada or Canadians. He'd rather spread falsehood about faraway foreign lands, Mr. Speaker. Will he not stand up for once for Canada, axe the tax so our families can eat?
The criticism there, Alexandra, or the political attack from the Liberals, is the use of the word faraway foreign lands, which they say is something Donald Trump has used. They compared it to Neville Chamberlain, 100 years ago almost, in terms of the appeasement of Germany. What's your reaction when you hear language like that in Parliament? Is this just nothing, or does that concern you?
Well, it is concerning in that it is echoing Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policy during World War II. And as I have said, I believe that we deserve to hear what the Conservative Party platform is on foreign policy generally, and in particular with respect to Ukraine.
Okay, just one last point on this is in the parliamentary back and forth over the Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, the Conservatives tried to amend it a couple of times to have increased military aid for Ukraine be put in there. Now, the Liberals voted against it, arguing you couldn't amend a free trade agreement at this stage. The Ukrainian Canadian Congress has criticized the Conservative votes against things. Why are you not upset by the Liberals voting against an increase in military support for Ukraine in that process?
The motions that were made in the context of the debate over the free trade were, I would say, gratuitous. I would think that the Conservatives know that those motions would have been ruled out of order. This was not the context to start introducing your policy on Ukraine. That should be done separate and apart from a free trade agreement. And of course, the effect of any further amendments to that free trade agreement would have meant that Canada has to go back to the bargaining table with President Zelenskyy, and it would have delayed the passage of a free trade bill that is critical to Ukraine's economic survival. We're not just talking about military support, it's economic support and humanitarian support as well.
Alexandra Chyczyi, President of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Always appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.